Hello, Internet, and thank you very much for tuning into the Cloud Native FM. This is episode number 120. And what we are talking about today is really make you excited, I can bet you. So let me give you some prospectus of what we are covering today. It's no surprise that embedded code example in open source project documentation has become increasingly common. Many are even interactive and allow user to fiddle around the code in real time. Instead of foregoing documentation in favor of code, why not seamlessly embed and run code, cloud resources, and command inside your docs? And instead of maintaining them separately, fuse them into a singular source of truth, all stored in a markdown, so that if somebody is rambunctious enough and rather copy and paste tediously, we won't shut the door in their faces. So say hello to Runme, and I will be speaking a very great detail about this tool. So I have some very good guests with me. So let me introduce those guests. Jeremy Lewis is joining me today on this episode. He is a machine learning platform engineer with over 15 years of experience and expert in using AI to solve practical business application, and have built platform for YouTube, Google Cloud Platform, and Primer to enable ML engineers and data scientists to rapidly develop and deploy model into production. And he played a pivotal role in developing systems like YouTube video recommendation. He also made major contribution to open source software, including creating Kubeflow, one of my favorite tool in the CNCF toolbox, and one of the most popular OSS framework for ML. He's expert in cloud services, Kubernetes, MLOps, LLMOps, CI/CD, IAC, and GitOps. And now he's unlocking an AI assistant for DevOps called File that we'll be covering today in this episode. He lives in the Bay Area with dog Ollie. When he's not working, he enjoys skiing, baking chocolate chips, cookies, and hanging out with Ollie. So another guest with me, he's a founder of Stateful, and his name is Sebastian Huckleberry, co-creator and open source tool Runme, and a co-founder of Stateful Inc, the company. Sebastian has been involved in deep tech for 2 decades. He has helped pioneer browser test automation on Sauce Lab and advanced cloud native APIs for small steps. And he has now found his passion in unlocking runnable knowledge base for teams, and a German national living abroad in the United States. He is thrilled to speak at conference every to trailblaze the way to restore faith in internal ops docs once and for all. With all, I will go straight for my guest. First up, Sebastian, over to you. If I miss in the intro, please see to add.
Hey, excited to be here. No, I think you nailed it. My name is Sebastian Huckleberry. I recently changed it from Tietke. I didn't want to make anybody, having to figure out how to pronounce that. So if there's any confusion, I'll just add that piece. But yeah, that's me. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Over to you, Jeremy. Can you say hi to our audience?
Hi, yeah, really grateful for this opportunity to chat about Runme and how we can use AI to make DevOps easier and really achieve the vision of making it easy for developers to build and operate their applications themselves.
Awesome, absolutely. And I have super guests with me with tons of experience in the open source communities, and also for the customer side and coming from the cloud angle as well. So I have wonderful guests with me, so I will pick up some questions up front. So without any further go, sometime I feel like people will feel like how this thing actually originated. What's actually the problem you're solving? So my first question to Sebastian, what inspired the creation of Runme? And how did it evolve into a tool it is today?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. I want to say, and I'm going to try to keep it brief because it's a bit of a journey. I want to say that, what Runme now is probably something it morphed into. And I think with a lot of technologies, you don't really intentionally create them. You kind of discover them and then realize, based on users and feedback, that your initial thesis, your assumptions were actually wrong. But the good news usually is that users kind of tether you and guide you in the right direction. That's kind of what happened with Runme. But the impetus, where it started, was in a lot of ways, it was probably two things. One, my experience and my co-founder's experience of running operations, including like, outfitting data centers literally from the ground up, stack, one or layer one, or like layer zero, I should say, all the way up to, delivering like a web app and anything in between. And just seeing how automation hasn't actually sipped through all those layers, especially as you get closer to the metal and the physical building, and a level of dissatisfaction with that. And our backgrounds, my co-founder Adam and I's background in test automation, kind of like, there were these two sort of things at odds, right? An impedance mismatch where you're like, why do we have so much automation here and like virtually none over here? That sort of like general driver of like looking for answers and asking questions and coming up with like, better ways of having it seep through all those layers kind of like ultimately brought us to documentation, and how documentation, unlike anything else in software engineering and the software world, is still static text, is still words. And while there's a lot of power, as we know when we invented the book press in the written word, right, it doesn't have a great shelf life, right? Where, especially if you describe the how, not just the what and the why, the how seems to perish the fastest. So, with that sort of idea in mind, we kind of went to go look around, like what are the things that people already do? What are the things that we don't do? And what we also realized is that DevOps kind of stops at the human. It's very good, like, when you start automating machines and your production environments, but like the human is a little bit locked out once you kind of like get on the other side of it, right? So documentation is sort of like the human superpower. Everybody loves high quality docs. Nobody wants to write them. Nobody wants to maintain them, right? So all of that, and then like, a lot of soul searching kind of like, wound up in a place where we realized that Markdown is ubiquitous. Everybody uses Markdown, sometimes begrudgingly, sometimes excitedly, but it's sort of the lingua franca of the last mile to the human. And that's kind of where we started. And that then spurred into, Jupyter notebooks, how they interleave words and codes, make it executable. And we got inspired by that. And, and there's a lot of like other things in between, but that's where the original story comes from.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thing you spoke about is actually make a very sense, because when back in the day, people think, oh, do not write code with the documentation, because as the code will actually evolve, the documentation might not evolve. And then people think that, oh, what the hell? We skip the documentation. And just remember back in the day, developers just interested in fixing the bugs, fixing the feature, adding feature to the functionality. They're not very like about this approach of writing the docs for themselves. That sometimes there's another team is writing the docs for them. And this became a very chaos, because developers know what is in the production, and the marketing team or the doc team doesn't know what in the production, but they feel like this might be there in production. And we have some of the chaos in the setup as well. So yeah. I spent a lot of...
It's about making those two things. One is like whichever one the primary is, and then the secondary actually fuse it into one, right? So that I think that's kind of like, at the core of it, right? Like don't make documentation just an afterthought, where if you do documentation, like one trailing the other, and, like this convergence, right? It's like fusing into one.
Yes, absolutely. And I think very interesting if people are listening to us right now, because this is a super informative space where the actually stuff is happening. And that's make me very excited about this tool, Runme. And I think in terms of congratulations for actually come up with the name, because it's very easier for me to understand what it is, and also for the algorithm to actually be in the market as well. So Jeremy, I will go with you for the next question. So I think there's something you have been doing for a very long time. It's called File AI. And tell us about what it is, how it started, what is your journey from this tool, and how it's actually, what are the pain problem it's solving today?
Yeah, so I spent most of my career working on ML platforms, and I was getting the itch, particularly when I was working on Kubeflow, of getting back to applying AI to solve business problems, as opposed to just building tools to help you with AI. And then, about 2 years ago, when ChatGPT came on and really sort of added fuel to the AI fire, I was really even more excited and motivated to try to get back to applying AI to business problems. And so I thought about like, what is the business problem that I have an unfair advantage of, and that I know a lot about, that I can apply AI to. And so that was that was my motivation to try to use AI to solve platform engineering and the problem of why is it so difficult for us as developers to actually deploy and operate our applications. And so it was trying to apply AI to that. And sort of the insight I kind of had was cloud and DevOps is hard because it's complicated, meaning there's a lot of steps that are difficult to know, but once you know them, and if you have the right playbook, then it's very easy to do those steps. And that seemed like a problem that AI and generative AI was really ripe to solve, because it's mainly a problem of how do you generate the right instructions and documentation. And so then I was trying to think about, like, well, how do we package that up? What's the right UX? And at first I experimented with just building a CLI. And so you had like a CLI that you would type in natural language, and then it would give you commands which you could execute. And started with the CLI for no other reason than it was super easy for me as a backend engineer and someone familiar with Go to kind of code up and do quickly. But I quickly realized that that was just not a good UX, right? The CLI experience does not really encourage you to write in natural language. It's a pain to edit when you have like your natural language prompts. So I started to think about what's a better experience, and I started to think that notebooks, being in the ML space, it's hard to not be familiar with notebooks like Colab and Jupyter, and that seemed like a much better experience. But there were some obvious pain points why notebooks never took off for like DevOps. One of them being they create this all in the pool problem where once you start writing Jupyter notebooks, everyone on your team needs to start using Jupyter. But that's like an easily solvable problem, as Runme has shown. So anyways, I started building a front end for this AI using VS Code notebooks, and then independently discovered sort of serendipitously that Runme existed. So Adam, the other co-founder of Stateful, posted in the platform engineering Slack channel, and I noticed his post, and so I went and checked out Runme, saw that they had been building something very similar to what I was building from a front end, but they were much further along, and they had a lot of advantage features I didn't have in my Foil front end. So I decided, since they were fully open source, Apache license and everything else, and very similar tech stack, that just to integrate with them. So now the idea is that Foil is the AI that kind of powers the AI experience in Runme.
Awesome, absolutely. I've seen some of the demos in the website foil.io and really amazed by some of the intelligence it's bringing. And I think one of the Claude and ChatGPT miss some of that information, but the Foil has some unique intelligence because as you're typing in command, it can actually analyze, feed them, and store the value inside it, and make some smart decision as on the fly as well. So it's a very unique functionality brings in as well. So I can go again to the Sebastian. Sebastian, if you have some demos, anything you want to share on the screen, go ahead. But let our people know. Might be there are some people who are listening to us really new to this thing called DevOps Notebook. We have seen people are using Jupyter Notebook, all these kind of things. So can you let us first describe what the DevOps Notebook are and how are they used in the current DevOps ecosystem, particularly in the Kubernetes space? There's a lot of stuff that need to be task and actually task oriented. So many stuff going on these days.
Yeah, that's a good question. So definitionally, DevOps Notebook sounds very abstract, right? And there's a lot to it, but I'll try to probably link it to the use case of Kubernetes, right? Like, I mean, one striking experience that I had more recently, because my sort of home cloud is GCP. I've dabbled in AWS and used it in the past more so. But like when you go on any AWS documentation that teaches you how to use pod identity or how to like use a application load balancer, it's almost like you look at it and it's the EKS CTL, kubectl, like curls, Helm charts, and I take that documentation page and literally copy and paste it into a notebook and run it, right? And that's at the baseline really what a DevOps notebook is. It's just like, instead of having documentation pages where you literally like copy and paste into a terminal, run, copy, paste in terminal, run, right? It's like, it's this whole, integrated experience where, a cell, just has the command in it and you have a play button, you can run it, right? Outside of that, it's probably worthwhile mentioning that we make the same functionality available in a CLI, because like what really underpins the notebook experience is this notion of a notebook kernel, right? Not going to explain exactly what that means, but it makes it so that you can use different modalities to interact with your documents, your markdown documents, right? One might be a CLI, another one might be a notebook. It could be the editor itself, with like overlays where you can, click on a play button, right? But at the end of the day, it is very ungratifying that like all this knowledge, all this know-how is like in these static websites and like semi-static websites, but they're not operationalized where I can literally just click and play, right? And whether I'm on my host environment or I'm attached to a jump host, right? There's just this sort of tooling gap that we overcome by copy and pasting from one into the other. And that's in a lot of ways, it sounds silly and it sounds like an easy thing to do, but like there's a lot of fidelity. It's like sending Morse codes to one another, right? It's like, yeah, we could do that. Like, would be an interesting podcast if the three of us would have to send Morse code to each other, right? But it's like, I think the analogy is not so, like far-fetched, right? So what the DevOps Notebook really does is the idea of like taking all the tools that we use, an editor, a terminal, a browser, a cloud console, and instead of having them sort of be vertical silos, it kind of like flips it, 90 degrees and integrates it, vertically, right? So now a cell and the description and how you execute it, and there's a whole lot of stuff under the hood that manages like an environment, like allows for one cell to influence or like to like store something in the environment that like, subsequent cells can build on, so that you can actually overcome these tooling gaps that have existed since probably the 70s, right? When the process model, POSIX, all the goodness of Unix and all that came out, right? So in the DevOps Notebook, we're really trying to capture that all the way to rendering web components inside of a notebook that might be visualizing your Kubernetes cluster, right? So that conceivably, and this is totally possible, to a degree, I mean, there's a lot of more work to do. You never actually have to leave the notebook, right? Like even if you're like running a Terraform plan and it stands up a new cluster, the subsequent cell might just render that, right? So you never have to like go and log in and figure out where to click on. So this is a long-winded way, and I hope I, didn't lose people here, but like we're trying to like bring this all together under this umbrella of a DevOps notebook, but then also with the caveat that like, as Jeremy said, it's not all in the same pool. It's like you can also adopt it incrementally because it renders and saves and stores the data in Markdown, and you can still copy and paste if you feel rambunctious, how I like to say. If you want to like, be more tedious, you can still do that, right? It doesn't lock the door in anyone's face. So that was a lot of talking. So, I hope that like describes it at least, a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. I think another thing people can try to relate is sometimes you do have an incident management scenario where you want to troubleshoot and capture all the things you have been done, what's in the past, what's happened in the cluster before when actually it's broke down, and then you stood up when you go in front of the screen, you try and fixing it up. Now you can generate a full report of it, but just using a markdown file, capture everything. And in markdown, you're not leaving the console, you're not going in the Terraform cloud or anywhere. It's just embedded in there as well. So I think for Sebastian or Jeremy, I think this is a great tool. So I would definitely want people to see some of the few things you can actually share.
I'm gonna like kind of like really start at the baseline here, right? I mean, this is sort of like my sort of introduction. Like instead of using a slide deck, I just use a notebook, right? So as you can tell here, all I did is I ran a curl and I told it to be silent. And in Runme, we have this notion of interactive execution and non-interactive. It's exactly how that works in the terminal space. Many people probably don't really know the difference because it's oftentimes something that's natural. But like interactive just means like you have inputs, right? And non-interactive means you don't. So if I tick that interactive box here and run it, I'll probably just get I get an error because it tries to like just spew a bunch of like binary, like the binary stream onto the console, right? Which is not going to do very much for me. But what Runme can do is, as part of like rendering things in the notebook, it will dynamically analyze the binary stream and then infer what media type it is. In this case, it's a PNG, so it renders the PNG, not just the binary stream of it, right? In a lot of ways, like you can do more sophisticated things than just curling images, right? But I do like doing that because documentation is still broken, and I like this little GIF here, right? But to give you a little bit more of a sophisticated example is, if you run this script here, this is literally just a bunch of JavaScript, and it pulls down, same thing, it pulls down image and renders it. Now you have that big Runme logo, right? You're like, wow, that's way too big. But it happens so that I have an environment variable that I can set a scaling factor to, right? So let me set that to 1% of the original size and run it again, and boom, there you go. Now it's much smaller, right? And this kind of just visualizes how, or like illustrates how, you can make your documentation not just dynamic. It actually looks like documentation and it works like documentation, right? Because it really just focuses on what's the meat and the potatoes of what you're trying to do, and doesn't clutter it with like, how do I get things in my environment? How do I get all this other prerequisite stuff, right? That has to happen for me to have a functional environment. We do have answers to that in Runme that are integral and that use existing standards. But the point is, like, it doesn't have to be in the cell, right? So your cells also stay concise and really like get the point across of like what the documentation is supposed to teach you, right? And let's see. There is a couple of more things that we do. I'm going to skip over some of this, but again, we run any sort of code. You don't have to use VS Code. You can run it in anything that is compatible to the VS Code platform, because we built on kind of Chromium, not on Chrome. If that analogy, like helps. And there are many of them, including like the new Cursor IDE. You can self-host it as a web app, all that sort of stuff. One thing to like understand about Runme, and this is like, people always go to like wanting to write shell script in the cells, and like for what it's worth, that's not the worst idea. That's kind of what it is. But you don't want to like code up prompts, right? Like you don't want to clutter your documentation with like how to read from standard in. What we have in Runme is this little fold out that lets you configure individual cells, and that kind of helps you to change the way the execution experience will behave, right? One thing that's very common is like having prompts, right? You have a environment variable and you need a value for it, right? And the way this works is like, it will just ask you, right? And there's sort of a difference here between if it's set to always prompt, auto prompt, or never prompt, right? And I'm not going to go through all those cases. All I wanted to bring across is like that the way you unlock these features, it's orthogonal to how shell works, but it makes sense because you don't want to clutter your documentation with shell that's irrelevant to what you're actually trying to do, right? Because like all of these scenarios are very, very common, and everybody is going to have to figure out how to get the right values into the documentation, right? So there's a lot of that I probably don't have time to go into, but like we really try to figure out what are all these auxiliary standards that we can pull in to solve some of those problems, right? And another one outside of environment variables is prerequisite dependencies, like binaries, like JQ, kubectl, and all that. And if you really want to lock it down all the way to a patch version, you could just use a def container, right? So VS Code is native to def containers. You probably already have a container supply chain, right? You have a lot of container builds. You know how that works. So you can just do more of it, right? And that kind of like gets you a little bit more into the operational use case because, you probably don't want to like burden anybody who's using a documentation to always having to use a def container. But if it really matters, it's a good tool to use to lock in dependencies, right? Let's see, there's other things like rendering cloud resources, right? Like this is a big query that runs in GCP. That's their native sort of like snowflakey SQL, execution engine. And what I just did there is like in one cell I have my query. I named the cell in a way a environment variable would look like. The convention here matters. And then when I run it, instead of like executing the SQL, it would store it in the environment, and then a subsequent cell can pick it up from there, right? And this is what this command here does. And then what's cool about Runme here is, again, instead of just giving you, vanilla CSV, which is what the integrated terminal can do if I turn it on, it will render a tabular view of it, right? And I can go sort it and but at the end of the day, it's just JSON, right? So if I turn on the interactive execution here, it will run the same query, but look, this is actually the underlying data, right? So Runme is kind of smart enough to realize, hey, it's JSON, let me render a table for you, right? And this kind of continues, and this is the last thing I'm going to show before I pass the conversation back is if I, for example, wanted to render a widget for, like, in this case, all of my clusters in EKS, I think I should have at least one, yes. So, like, I drop the UL and I can even use environment substitution here, and then I get a list of clusters, right? And now from here, I can say, okay, show me the details of this cluster. And this is sort of the notion of, instead of like kicking you out into the console, it brings the console in, right? And what's nice about this is when you document like a solution of some kind, and it's a mix of a load balancer and a cluster and a bunch of pods, you can actually like just describe that cross-section of what you need concisely in a document, and not like scrambling to figure out how what I'm writing here fits onto the console, right? Where like I have to look for demo one, right? What's demo one? What what region? What project? What AWS credentials, right? And yeah, I guess since we talked about Kubernetes clusters, I can just configure my kube context to point at the right cluster with one click, right? Because I already have all these environment variables set based on the stuff up here, right? And it's just very seamless. I can like look at my pods if I wanted to. Let me make this a little bit bigger. I could even go so far and kick this out to another move into editor area, right? So like I don't lose focus of it. Sorry. And yeah, here we go. This is better. And then, I can actually go and deploy an app. Looks like this is not deployed yet, so I'm just going to deploy it, right? And this is obviously not sophisticated Kubernetes Helm chart kind of stuff or GitOps, but you will find that there's a lot of scenarios, and they are usually not what the developers need. This is what the platform team internally needs. That is not necessarily about deploying. It's about like troubleshooting, debugging, developing, right? And then being able to share that state, of work with others. And by the way, this is very easy because you can just turn on basically what amounts to a carbon copy of your session, and then with one click share it, right? You just click on generate gist, boom, and it generates a gist for you. You pop it into a channel, right? And maybe kind of drive the point home here. This is also what my company, Stateful, is looking to build a integrated experience, a product around with permissioning and redacting, yada, yada, that sort of stuff. But yeah, at the end of the day, it works really nicely, for these scenarios where you just can't put it in a pipeline. The cost of putting in a pipeline is too high. But if you wanted to, you could literally put this whole notebook in a pipeline and run it against the pipeline, right? It's like whether you run shell scripts or the whole notebook is almost, irrelevant, right? So that's sort of my quick demo of the baseline features.
No, it's a super wonderful demo and wonderful explanation. I think I think right now there's a need in the industry right now where we have so many stuff in the cluster. Even if I develop something locally, I need some cloud shells. I need something to have running in the cloud. Then I leave the console, go in the cloud base, and then I forget the exported variable where we are. So I think this is the developer's heaven if they're actually looking at it now. Right now we have in a console, they can see the value out of it. But I go to the Germany because Germany need to speak something right now. So Jeremy, can you share some of the AI stuff with, let's say, Foil and other part of the stuff?
Yeah, great. So I think Sebastian gave us a great demo of Runme and what its basic capabilities are. Now I'm going to kind of show how those capabilities can be enhanced with the AI capabilities of Foil. So this is a simple Hello World application that I've built, where every time you go to it, you get a greeting. It's being generated with ChatGPT because why wouldn't you use AI these days? So if this is my application, right? Basic observability, it's one of those things that all of us as developers have to do to kind of understand our application and make sure that it's running healthily. So I'm going to go ahead and open up VS Code. And so I have a markdown document here, which I've opened up, and it's as a notebook, as a Runme notebook. And so the first thing I'm going to do is try to get my logs. So I'm going to type my intent in the markdown document. And so you can see that as I'm describing that intent, I have this lightly grayed out code cell, which is being suggested to me by Foil. So that code cell is Foil trying to figure out what are the commands you can execute to achieve the intent you've described inside the Markdown document. So in this case, I've said to fetch the logs, and it's given me a gcloud command. And since this is a Runme notebook, we can just go ahead and execute that. And we can see the actual logs that we've gotten thanks to Runme's capabilities, right? So if we think about this, what are some of the advantages or problems that AI is solving for us? Well, the first problem is this command is very difficult for me as a human to remember and type. One of the reasons I never use Google Cloud logging, even when my logs are in Google Cloud, is because it's just hard to remember this query. So typically I resort to kubecontrol logs, which is in many ways an inferior experience because you don't have all those rich querying capabilities that you have if you're using Datadog or Cloud Logging or another logging system, right? Most of my logs for DevOps are structured logs, so they're JSON log entries, and you'd like to be able to do filtering based on those log types. And you can't really do that easily with kubecontrol, but if you're running with gcloud or using Datadog's querying capabilities or Cloud Logging's querying capabilities, you can do that. The other thing you could imagine is maybe if I'm new to the team, I don't even know that my logs are inside of Google Cloud Logging or Datadog, but Foil does. And Foil does it because it learns. So what happens is every time you describe an intent through markdown cells and then execute that command, Foil takes that as an example of how do we achieve that intent. And it learns that, so if people ask similar intents in the future, we can it can suggest the appropriate commands. So as another example, the next thing we might want to take a look at is latency. So let's say, show me the P95 latency for the Foil service, right? So we've gotten another command, another Go cell that I've just accepted here. And so what we can see here, this is actually a honeycomb query. So this is definitely a syntax that I cannot remember. But Foil has learned it and is able to suggest it. And so if we execute that command, it uses the CLI. It looks like it's gotten a bug inside the query. So it happens sometimes with Foil, with AI, but we can fix that. Let's change that to. And so now we can see the P95 latency. And so, as one of the advantages of using Runme is that all of this gets documented. So now I have this artifact that I've produced with all of the queries that I ran. So it's very reproducible. And then I also, as Sebastian just showed, we could potentially capture the outputs of those queries as well.
Awesome, wonderful. I love this. This one, I think last time you showed me, and that's one of the things I really like about the Foil, and particularly because this is currently I talk about in the platform engineering space, a developer cognitive load. So I think this also help for the newer team member as well, because for me, nerdy people like us, we can actually do whatever we want, but the newest member in the team doesn't know what these commands are doing in the scene. And let's say you have a machine or you have a setup, the AI is learning from you and then giving you some point the instruction as well. Sebastian and Jeremy for giving us a wonderful insight to the Runme and Foil. So there's a lot we actually already covered so far. So my audience is actually might be overwhelming or might be very excited about the things actually seen in their screen today. So I need to recap. So Runme achieves Markdown by specifically run your command shell bsh zsh and executes code inside your fence code blocks and renders URL into an attractive widget for GCP, AWS, etc. on cloud resources. It's 100% compatible with the programming language task definition, Makefile, Gradle, Grunt, NPM scripts, Pipfile or Deno, etc. and it's also markdown-native. Much like a terminal session, environment variable are retained across execution, and it is possible to pipe previous cells output into a successive cells. And runme persists your runbook in a markdown, which your doc are likely already been using. And also the foil, what the Jeremy gave us a quick intro of it. And do correct me wrong, Jeremy, if I'm actually doing any mistake in here. So file.io is a website. You can check it out. It's an open source project to bring an AI assistant into Runme Notebook. It helps you deploy and operate your application by letting you express your intent in natural language and then using AI to generate the command to achieve that intent. So I hope I did a quick recap here as well. So now the next thing I know, we are in the KubeCon horizon. Just a weeks or 2 weeks from now, there's a KubeCon happening. So Sebastian, my audience and everybody who is really excited about the Runme, they want to meet you. And they also want to know what's coming up in the next few releases of Runme. So tell them how they can meet you in the KubeCon and plus the near future in the horizon.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'll be at KubeCon. My company Stateful has a booth. Not exactly sure where, but somewhere on the conference floor. So come by, say hi. I'll be there. That should be straightforward. In terms of the roadmap, there are basically like two sort of headliner that like are worthwhile mentioning. One is I've been working on this type system for the environment for probably like 6 months now, off and on. And I'm looking to finally ship the first version of that before KubeCon. And the idea behind it is really about like how to make more sense of configuration and sequence management that is compatible with both human and machine identity. So it's one of those things where you think it's a solved problem, but it really isn't. So looking forward to get that out. And the second one, really short, is a way, we call it a playground, that will help you experience Runme notebooks literally from the website without having to install anything, just so that you can get to this aha moment of what sometimes take a little while or takes a whole demo much quicker. So those are the two things that we're looking to ship ahead of the conference, and I'm happy to talk about those as well as all the other goodness that we shared today. And I think Jeremy will be there too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I will be giving a talk at one of the satellite events on Monday at KubeCon Rejects. I'll be giving a talk and I'll be demoing some of the newer capabilities that we're adding to Foil and Runme. So we're adding the ability to really let the agent reason. So what we're doing is we're letting the agent take into account the outputs of your executed cells and then suggest markdown cells that reason about those. So it can actually tell you like, oh, we thought you were missing the annotation, so you ran the kube control command to get the annotation, and the annotation is there. So that's not the problem with workload identity. Try this other problem or command. So at the talk, I'll be giving a demo of that, and then I'll also be talking a little bit more about what's happening behind the scenes with the AI, how it works, how we do learning. So if folks are curious about, how do we actually build these AI applications and do solve problems like evaluation, that'll be a great opportunity to learn. And then the rest of the time, I'll probably be at the Stateful booth, hanging out, trying to meet folks and talk about what problems they're trying to solve and how we can help solve them.
Awesome, absolutely. And I think I will add the link, and also there's a floater appearing somewhere on the screens. You can actually take a look at Jeremy's talks coming up in the KubeCon, and do definitely attend because his talks are wonderful. If you go in his website, lewi.us, you can see all his detail of the previous talk as well, and some are very fascinating. And he has a very ton of experience from the Google and the primer.ai and working on the foil.io right now. So he's a great person to hang out as well. And also Sebastian has some great insight about the domain he is working on as well. So before I let you off, both of the guy, I want to know what feedback have you received from developer who have used Runme, and what are the major impact they have tells you on their day-to-day workflow of using Runme?
Yeah, I'll go first real quick. It's very interesting. I think there is a little bit of a disbelief because people are not used to this sort of modality of a notebook. It's almost kind of like you have to show them, because if you just explain it to them, it's there's too much there that like it's almost kind of like trying to explain a new color that hasn't existed until you see it. You know how do you describe it to anybody, right? So that's like the first sort of like impression, especially from folks that are native to a terminal that grew up inside of it. And then like once you get over that hump, there's actually a lot of excitement, similar to you, Saeem. And then when it comes then to people that apply it, I think they realize that how much there is, how much toil there is, how much there actually is still left that is not captured by previous like pipeline models, the sort of like bread and butter of DevOps and in the larger GitOps movement. So I have to also admit that there's still a lot that Runme has to grow into. So if something doesn't work when you're using it, like please file a GitHub issue, find us on Discord. If we know we can put it on the roadmap, we can fix it. But I think generally there's like sort of like a disbelief and then a little bit of a moment of enlightenment. And I hope by being on here that we can, expedite that process, right? And I think we want to kind of create a movement around this sort of like ops as code, right? Like kind of almost elevate it, from and have all these parts of GitOps infrastructure, the code inside of that, right? So that's my response.
Also, I go to the Jeremy, and I can change a few questions here. Jeremy, what is the feature you have seen people are liking most, and with the previous question also embedded in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one and the same, I guess, is the same answer. So I think one of the questions we get most about Foil is Foil has a new sort of UX for AI, right? So the two modalities we have right now with AI are one sort of autocomplete / ghost text, which is what you have in GitHub Copilot originally, which is you're typing and then you get some suggested text continuing from that cursor position. And then the other is we're all familiar with the chat-like experience of Claude and ChatGPT-3. And then Foil uses ghost cells, which is like the combination of both of those, where you're typing in one cell, and as you're typing in one cell, Foil's automatically suggesting other cells. And a lot of people don't question, like, why do you need that new experience? Why don't you just explicitly prompt the model like you do in ChatGPT, where you type your question, and then when you're ready, you press enter. And so that's a new user experience. But this turns out people really like this experience because it provides a faster iteration loop with the AI. So one of the problems you have with like ChatGPT or when you're doing chat is you have to think about like how much context do I have to provide to the AI so that it can understand my task and give me the correct command. And one of the benefits of like the ghost experience is that you can kind of see what the model is thinking, and you can adjust your response to provide keywords to steer the model closer if it's necessary. You also don't have to break out of your flow. Like if you're in the flow state of kind of debugging a problem, it can be a little bit disruptive to think like, oh, is it worth it to me to switch out of getting stuff done to go over to ChatGPT or Claude to kind of get it to help me write a command that I could probably figure out myself. But with this experience, you can kind of just stay in that flow state of, thinking through your problem and writing your documentation in Runme. And then as you're doing that, the AI is automatically turning that into commands that you can execute.
Absolutely, and I think this makes perfect sense because if you live in the Kubernetes world or also in some of the scripting languages, there's a new ways to do the all newer stuff or the older stuff. So for this thing, I can see if you're trying to write few commands on the terminal, it picks up, it's reading them out, it's learning from it, is thinking fast, and it's actually compared to the chat GPT or the cloud, it's become more smart enough to understand in a smaller amount of time and then giving you the same functionality. And you don't need to type in log tedious command to remind that about as well. That's when you see the demo I really love about this thing as well, because especially in the Kubernetes world or in the Kubernetes CRD worlds, sometimes commands get very messy out of the way, and you don't know what's happening there. And this is as a great AI assistant for that. I think if there's AI being integrated in some of the very developer Hammonly way, then I think Foil is one of the number one contender for this one, because it's making some of the great initiative as well. So before I let you go, Sebastian, I know there's a company behind this project. So do call out some of the stuff, how it's open source and some of the commercial product. What is the difference between both of them? And what are the state of the Stateful as a company today?
Yeah. Thank you. So yes, Stateful is the company behind Runme. And the idea is that this notion of, ops as codes and the tooling to make that happen, in our mind, needs to be open source. It's something that everybody should have access to. And I think it just makes sense. It's interesting it took us so long to breach, this sort of barrier and integrate, the tools that we use on a daily basis in a way that doesn't require us to copy and paste between those. So we're really focused on making that available to everybody and everyone, right? And we want to really like popularize it. Where we see, as a company that we're building around this, as Stateful in a product, is more like sort of the typical team and enterprise use cases, right? Where you run through a troubleshooting analysis, the ones that Jeremy has described, including like all the details inside of your organization, things that you don't want to leak outside of your organization, which is plentiful, right? So with Stateful, we're trying to build sort of a layer around this that makes that really easy, right? From sharing to making redacting, like optional for your internal team versus like external. You can, essentially think about like authentication, authorization, creating those artifacts and then securely storing them, securely sharing them, creating like bug reports that are more like higher in fidelity than a screenshot or like a trace of like a couple of lines. So we think there's a whole lot of like space there, where we can even make the easy button available, right? Where in a team you shouldn't really have to worry about like sometimes even how to run a notebook, right? We're seeing that some of our prospective customers, they don't even want to run it locally. They want to have a cloud hosted, version of the notebook, right? And that's what the company is focused on. We have a product available right now on stateful.com that's free for up to 2 users. And it's in a lot of ways what helps us figure out what matters to users. So please sign up, try it out, let us know what you like about it. We are continuing to iterate on it. And from sort of where we are at a company, we're a startup. We are like venture backed. We at the seed stage, so we're really trying to, simultaneously make Runme a lot better and it add all sorts of capabilities to it, but then also figure out how to like get it into teams and really help them with their day-to-day challenges, right? And the ideal customer profile here or user profile is really like people that work in platform teams. I call them the people with the keys to the cloud castle, right? So the ones that are usually like platforming others, whether that is through GitOps or by giving an access to a namespace in the cluster. It's usually the ones that then have to do a lot of troubleshooting as part of that handoff. And Stateful can be a much better way to like manage escalations, kind of like almost like you manage a pull request. And when you're done with it, you resolve it, but you have all the artifacts be part of that timeline. So that's kind of like the idea and the vision behind it, and we're making like sort of inroads to get there. But the more feedback we get on the technology, Runme, and then how that relates to a team, and ideally in the long run, an enterprise experience, the better. So we're really in this mode where we want to get as much feedback as possible. But I appreciate the opportunity to like talk about it. I love that stuff, and I love talking about it.
Yes, absolutely. I've seen your talks. It's been very proficient, very educational, and also to the point of where the developers' pains are today. So it's been really a great learning session for me as well. For I think
Awesome.
actually people are listening to us, Do share your feedback on the YouTube comment section. So we want to know like where you actually stuck in your DevOps process, so that Jeremy and his team will pick it up and start working on that spectrum as well. So I think for me, I think is right now, I love the project in a sense where I think in a CI/CD pipeline, there's a great, very great and very unique use cases for Runme, because it's on the CI/CD pipeline and DevOps Notebook in general. Now we have tasks, we have multiple tasks in a DevOps processes. So we need to document those things. And without documentation, we lose step out of the way. What are my ways to document stuff? It's going to be a convoluted these days. And with Runme as a tool, is give you a lot of synergies between what you have been doing on code and what you have been doing in the writing side of things. So I think it's been a great moment of actually helping people understand the importance of writing the code, writing the documentation in a way that become a programmable, and that's become shareable with the team. You can do it, you can share it on the VS Code repository or something as well. And I think if you want to follow along, go into the runme.dev. I think one of the easiest URL on the internet exists, that is runme.dev. And also, if you go into the file, foyle.io is the website where you can see the Runme as AI assistant for that point as well. So hopefully you like the conversation. So I need to conclude some of the stuff we actually talk about today. So for my key takeaway from this conversation is, keeping code and documentation in sync has always been a tough nut to crack. The constant evolution of code often leads to outdated or inaccurate documentation, causing frustration for developers and end user alike. With tool like Runme, the challenge of ops as code for your docs becomes significant easier by introducing executable markdown and seamless integration into the development workflow. Runme could be the perfect tool to adopt for streamlined, automated, and developer-friendly approach to maintaining accurate and up-to-date documentation. With that, we will be meeting you again in the near future. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Stay safe and have a wonderful day, rest of you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Likewise. Bye bye.
Thank you.